Hello and welcome. Last week I made my first visit, well you might almost call it a pilgrimage, to a Jordan Peterson rally which was taking place in Oklahoma in the United States. Why was I there? Well, I and my YouTube colleagues from Catholic Unscripted, Mark Lambert and Catherine Bennett, had been invited to a behind-the-stage event following his appearance, partly because Catherine Bennett has become Tammy Peterson's good friend. Although I'd once been invited to take part in an academic seminar probing Peterson's ideas with him in person and followed him assiduously on YouTube, I had never seen him live in amphitheatre, action man, philosopher mode before. Within a few days of my visit, the internet was suddenly awash with a hit piece in a US Catholic publication, Crisis magazine, in an article by Scott Venturea. And he was denouncing Peterson as a dangerous phenomenon to Christians. The article was intended to make Christians anxious about Jordan Peterson and to mistrust him. You can tell the difference between a hit piece and a reasoned analysis quite easily when you read something. The hit piece tells you only one half of the story, but a reasoned analysis gives you both sides and lets you choose between. This was a hit piece. My own analysis of Peterson, based on the rally in Oklahoma, Peterson in his latest development, was completely different. However, I have to say that as the evening started, not everything was entirely straightforward. First of all, the structure of the Oklahoma evening struck me as being a little bit odd. Peterson began by announcing to his audience that he was going to be dealing with some fairly heavy subjects, reality and truth. But as one might expect from most academics and philosophers, he didn't offer to define his terms, which I thought he probably ought to. But this was a popular occasion, so perhaps one should cut him some slack. Because the next thing he did was he tapped really quite skillfully into people's experiences of reality and truth and offered some very useful pop psychology, repackaging some useful Freud, I have to say, to rapturous applause. But then he leapt into a very pointed discussion into the metaphysical reality of evil, mainly based on his experience of Auschwitz and his reading of Nazi history. In fact, he was so stark about the dangers of evil that he talked in terms a Pentecostal pastor or a Catholic exorcist might have used, in terms of letting the evil in, being possessed not only by ideas, which he's talked about in the past, but actually by evil spirits. Konstantin Kissin, the satirist and commentator, had been invited to join Peterson on a tour which was titled We Who Wrestle with God, and to act as a reflective conversationalist partner. In Oklahoma, he pressed Peterson really quite helpfully on a number of points, but the one that the audience had been waiting for was the one to do with the question that Peterson has been besieged by daily: do you believe in God? To which he has for some time really quite sensibly replied, well, it depends what you mean by believe, and it depends what you mean by God. However, things have changed, because since his wife was received into the Catholic Church at Easter, he's been interviewed several times, rejoicing with her on her behalf. So this prevarication is no longer really open to him. His response was eagerly expected in Oklahoma, and Kissin presented the question, obviously by prearrangement, in different terms, and said to him, do you believe in Christ's resurrection? Peterson replied, it seems the simplest explanation. Well, this combines a degree of ambiguity along with what is in fact a carefully coded response. At face value, the effect that the phrase, it seems to be the simplest explanation, that it was true, has and is intended to have the capacity of displacing all other objections to the resurrection, suggesting they're redundant, suggesting belief and trust. It implies belief, however, without stating it explicitly. This looks like it's going to be Peterson's next expression of supportive agnosticism when it comes to the faith. Now, some people are going to welcome it as being as close an ally of the faith as he can manage, and other people will see it as inadequate. But it may be that there are two aspects to Peterson's presently staged agnosticism, which are supported by this modified ambiguity. In other words, there's a purpose to it. The first is he's going to be aware that the majority of his vast number of followers are not yet Christians. Once again, in talking about his wife's newfound Catholic faith, he has retained a delicately balanced ambiguity. When asked if he's going to make the same journey as her, he says carefully, each of them have their own journey, each of them have their own vocation. She is pursuing hers, he is pursuing his. Sounds carefully, existentially relativistic, and it's intended to. But it seems to me very likely that at least one element in his reluctance to commit himself further to belief is that he's going to lose access, if he does, to those millions of his supporters who at the moment are open to his psychological apologias for the biblical truth, but would find them too hard to access if he took them from the area of psychological authenticity to absolute metaphysical truth. If Peterson came out clearly as a Christian, he might lose the uncommitted followers that his studied agnosticism has drawn in and made the possibility of faith just possible to them. It might even be a reasonable hypothesis that he may be sacrificing his own desire to come out as a public believer in order to continue to act as a conduit for what we might call the natural theology of the faith, or in his case the natural psychology of the faith constitutes, for those for whom creedal allegiance is a step too far. A bit like St. Paul saying he'd be almost anything to anybody in order to get them into a relationship with Jesus. Near the end of his performance, he did offer, however, what I thought to be an astonishingly prescient insight about paedophilia in the Catholic Church, one of the most important elements, I thought, in the whole evening's contribution. Imagine, he said, talking about the reality of evil, imagine there's a force of intelligent evil, and it plans to corrupt at the level of all that is most sacred. What might its strategy be? It might turn to corrupt innocence, in which case it would go after children. It might decide to use a potent and highly damaging form of corruption, and so choose sex and sexual abuse. It might seek to pervert the most trusted of occupations, let's say that of a priest, and do it within the most important spiritual and ethical organization in world history, and that would be the Catholic Church. Now, if this strategy by evil succeeded, the effect it would have would be to soil the reputation and the value of the Catholic Church across generations, present and to come. But who or what is to blame here? There is nothing intrinsically evil in either the priesthood or the Catholic Church. In fact, the opposite is true. They are intrinsically sacred. So what is to blame is evil as the cause, and in particular evil spirits that gain access for this intended strategy of despoliation. Do people blame this source of evil? No, they don't. They blame the church and the priests, and so the act of despoliation of children is doubly effective. The children are wounded, corruption is caused, and the church is blamed and made inaccessible to people. Does this imply the church and the clergy bear no responsibility for the evil done through them? Absolutely, certainly not. Nothing excuses either the perverted and beyond reprehensible clerical abuse of children, or the indefensible cover-up of abusers that senior clergy have perpetuated to this day at the highest levels of the Vatican. Let the reader understand. But it invites the listener to engage in an act of deeper discernment and to trace this ethical conflict one stage further back from the clergy and the institution to its origin, which is the campaign of evil itself to corrupt and to destroy not only people, but the priesthood and the organization of the church. In other words, it shifts part of the analytical gaze of discernment one step back from the instruments of corruption, the organization, to the cause of corruption, which is evil itself and the struggle we are in with it. And by implication, this points out the unhelpfulness of attacking the one body, the Catholic Church, that has in fact the unique capacity of resisting and defeating evil. You see the strategy now. Only because, as part of its struggle, it has suffered intermittent defeat of some corrupted clergy, which one might expect, human nature being what it is. Whatever the limitations or lack of them of Peterson's public performances, there are very few voices of intellectual competence and insight who are qualified or willing to raise the public gaze of a confused and metaphysically incompetent society to this arena of the cosmic fight between good and evil. We're not locked in a struggle with the Catholic Church or with perverted priests. We're locked in a struggle with evil, which has taken some of them over to keep us from accessing God through the Church. And since the clergy are often reluctant to talk in terms of the reality of heaven and hell and the fight for the salvation of the soul, we might at least be grateful that Jordan Peterson does it, and does it with conviction, clarity, competence and courage. The glass is not half empty, it's half full, much, much more than half full. Thanks be to God. God bless Jordan Peterson.